Indeed, they frequently accuse Christians and other religious believers of supporting policies that violate people's rights. We're all familiar with the rhetoric. You religious people shouldn't be imposing your values on other people. You're violating our rights. If it's between consenting adults, stay out of it. It's none of your business. Any two or more people have the right to define marriage for themselves. Women have a right to abortion. People have a right to take their own lives. Who are you to say otherwise, right? That's the standard rhetoric in these debates. But on the presuppositions of the secularist view, why should anybody respect anybody else's rights? What's the reason for respecting rights? Any answer must state a moral proposition, but what on orthodox secularist premises could provide the ground of this truth? Well, you may ask, why doesn't the secularist cheerfully affirm moral subjectivism or moral relativism? Indeed, isn't some sort of moral relativism at the heart of secularism? While one still hears subjectivism or relativism invoked at cocktail parties and in undergraduate classrooms and even occasionally in faculty lounges, it seems that the heyday of moral relativism is over, even among doctrinaire secularists. Most sophisticated secularists have concluded that relativism is ultimately inconsistent with many of their own cherished moral claims, particularly those having to do with claims about rights. The right to abortion, the right to sexual freedom, the right to equality, the right to die, and so forth. As the distinguished liberal political philosopher Joel Feinberg has warned his fellow liberals, quote, liberals must beware of relativism, or at least a sweeping relativism, lest they be hoist on their own petard. That's absolutely right. If relativism is true, then it's not wrong in principle to have an abortion, that's true, but neither is it wrong for people who happen to hate abortion to attempt to legislate against it or interfere with someone's right to have an abortion by, say, blockading a clinic or even murdering an abortionist. Claims of a right to abortion are manifestly moral claims. Claims that it's wrong to murder abortionists, which I happen to believe it is, are moral claims. They could possibly be true only if moral relativism and subjectivism are false. So the mainstream of orthodox secularism at the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st has become self-consciously moralistic and non-relativistic. Now, this is not to say that secularism is no longer, in some significant respects, a relativist doctrine. It's merely to say that secularism is no longer a thoroughgoing and self-consciously relativist doctrine. Insofar as it remains relativistic, it has a massive philosophical problem. Secularism, at least in its liberal manifestations, makes the rights of others the principle of moral constraints upon action, relativizing allegedly self-regarding actions. But it generates a critical question that it has no way of answering. And here's the question. Again, why should anyone respect the rights of anyone else? Merely prudential answers, such as, well, people should respect the rights of others so that others will respect their rights, or people should respect the rights of others to avoid being punished, simply won't do. The fact is that powerful people, smart people, clever people, shrewd people can often get away with violating other people's rights, and they know it, and many do it. If people shouldn't violate the rights of others, it must be because doing so is morally wrong. But on the secularist account, why is it morally wrong? What's the source of the moral wrongness? The eminent philosopher and Christian convert Alasdair MacIntyre observes that traditions of thought about morality go into crisis when they generate questions they lack the resources to answer. By this standard, orthodox secularism is a tradition in crisis. It generates the question, why should someone respect other people's rights, yet it possesses no resources for answering it. By contrast, Christian thought understands that human rights are rooted in intelligible and basic human goods. It therefore has no logical difficulty explaining why each of us has an obligation to respect the rights of others, as well as to act in conformity with other moral principles. And recent Christian teaching, including the teaching of popes and Protestant bodies, speaks unhesitatingly of universal human rights without the fear of collapsing into relativism or individualism of the sort that is characteristic of orthodox secularism. At the end of the day, whatever is to be said for and against secularism, there can be no legitimate claim for secularism to be a, quote, neutral, unquote, doctrine that deserves privileged status as the nation's public philosophy. As MacIntyre has argued, orthodox secularism, which he calls liberalism, is far from being a tradition-independent view that merely represents a neutral playing field on which Judaism, Christianity, Marxism, and other traditions can wage a fair fight for the allegiance of the people. Instead, it is itself a tradition of thought about personal political morality that competes with others. One of the things that I used to find frustrating in working in political philosophy in the academic world, and now I merely find amusing, is the claim that one runs into so often by secularist liberals that, look, we don't have a substantive view. We think liberalism should be the nation's public philosophy. It's Orthodox secular, what I'm calling Orthodox secularism, what McIntyre calls liberalism, should be the nation's public philosophy because it's just neutral. We're just proposing a level playing field on which other substantive schools of thought about ethics compete. We're not in there competing. I mean, it really strikes me as being very much like a pitcher who suddenly declares himself to be the umpire, you know, and starts 3 balls into the stands and says, "You're out." Secularism rests upon and represents a distinct and controversial set of metaphysical and moral propositions. It's not neutral, having to do with the relationship, we've already seen some of them, the relationship of consciousness to bodiliness. There's a controversial metaphysical claim on which you cannot escape taking a position, and liberalism does not escape taking a position, even if it's merely implicit. Or the relationship of reason to desire, or the possibility of free choice, or the source and nature of human dignity and human rights. Liberalism's not neutral on that stuff. It's got a position. I'm happy to argue with the position. Maybe those positions are right. Don't claim infallibility. But don't tell me you're not taking a position. Let's debate the issue where it actually gets engaged, not pretend that it's not there. Secularist doctrine contains very controversial views about what constitutes a person. Is a person a non-bodily substance, a consciousness inhabiting a body? Or is a person a dynamic unity of body and mind? You got to take a stand. A lot follows from it. Don't pretend you haven't taken a stand when you're arguing for sharp substantive positions on controversial moral issues. So these views are controversial, every bit as controversial as the Jewish and Christian views. Secularism is a philosophical doctrine that stands or falls depending on whether its presuppositions can withstand arguments advanced against them by representatives of other traditions, including Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox people, like those of us who joined together in the Manhattan Declaration. I thank all of you for your kind attention to this Castro-length lecture this evening, as I've tried to show that secularist orthodoxy, in fact, cannot withstand the critique advanced against it by neoclassical and Christian philosophy. Thank you.